just us?
I don't know. I can't even try. For some reason, I can't even get on there. I keep putting the number and it keeps coming up. It's not there.
Where? I think we're in the right place.
Sorry?
Aren't we in the right place?
Oh, I think so.
Hello.
Hello? Oh, hello. I recognise your face.
You do? From where?
I've seen it on the web, I think.
Wow. Wow.
And Andrew sent us a photograph of you earlier. Very good to meet you. Thank you for being there.
You're very welcome. Good. So we have a connection.
Yes, we do. My name is Joanna, and there is another student there called Lynn just now, but I don't know about the other.
There we go. Splendid. Thank you. Cheers now.
Hi, Andrew.
Hello. Hello, Godfrey.
You must be Joanna.
Hello, hello.
Hello.
And there's Lynn in Ireland.
I've got sound, but I've got no picture today.
Well, we can see you fine, and you're coming across well. So
I think we're fine. See you.
Well, we've had this band. Maybe it actually works better because of the bandwidth problem. You know how every time we've been coming on, you've been breaking up. So.
Oh, here you are.
Okay.
Oh, but I'm in a different place today.
Ah, right.
I'm on the Isle of Man.
Oh well, that's why it's working better then.
I'm going to have to leave Ireland and come over here.
Anyway, that's great to see you. So just if everyone remembers to turn the microphone off when they're not speaking so that we don't hear crackles and bumps and things like that. So yes, welcome to the last of our island governance seminars. And I'll just say hello to everyone just in a second, we'll introduce you all. But we're very lucky today to have Godfrey with us from Malta, who is the source of much of our information about what we've been discussing over the last many weeks. So it'll be really good to have a chance to question him and see what he really thinks, rather than what he's written in his books. So that's going to be good. So we've got, right, we've seen Joanna and we've seen Lynn. Who else is with us?
Hello, Ian.
Hello, Ian. Nice to see you. Now you're coming through nice and clear as well. So that's great. So say hi to Godfrey.
Hello. Hi.
Hi. I don't see your face yet, Ian.
Sorry about that.
Oh, there you are.
Where are you?
I'm in Malta.
Right.
With the summer.
Well, thank you for coming.
My pleasure.
Good afternoon, Godfrey. I'm Nick. I'm in Orkney at the moment.
Hi, Nick.
So how are you doing, Nick? How's you? Have you recovered from your fall?
Not really, no. But thank you for asking. No, still struggling a bit.
Oh dear. Yeah.
Did you break any bones?
Living beside the beach with rocks and things like that. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Fell onto some rocks on the beach while I was walking the dog. Silly thing to do.
Okay.
And then Joanna is there in Orkney as well. So we've got quite we've got two people from Orkney with us today, Godfrey. One on the Isle of Man, which is good. Lynn gets around a bit. I don't know where you are, Ian, today. Are you the West Coast or are you down in England? Nope, he's conked out. And we're just waiting now for Lynn in Wales. Hello, Lynn. Oh, you're here. Good.
I was here all along.
Very good. Nice to see you.
Yes, and I've just had an offer on my house, so I'm very excited.
Oh, splendid. I was telling Godfrey that you were on the process of moving to an island.
Congratulations,
Wales,
Lynn.
one
That's
island.
great news.
It is great news, and I've got someone else looking tomorrow. So we'll
Very
see.
good. And it's Westray, isn't it, that you want to go to?
That's fantastic. Well done.
Yeah, good news. Right. Well, that's good. So we've got a full complement today. That's excellent. We're here myself, so I'll switch off my microphone in a minute. Now, as I say, there's one of our core texts.
That looks familiar.
Thought it might. So I thought it would be, we're looking forward to hearing what you have to say, but I think it would be great if we could have a chat about the various aspects in here, because the chapters have formed the basis of many of the seminars, and they're a lot of what's being said that you've said in your book is very highly relevant to the Northern Isles at the moment, which you may or may not know what's happening here, but we'll have a discussion about that. And of course, the big debate in Scotland as a whole. So we've also been discussing certain aspects of subnationality and autonomy versus independence and things in the context of Scotland as well. So we're very much looking forward to hearing from you, Godfrey. So whenever you'd like to begin, please fire away. And as we just make sure that everybody knows that you want people to ask you questions and discuss things, and not be blate, is a good Scots word, not be shy, but engage in a dialogue with you.
Perfect. Okay, so let's see how this goes. So first of all, thank you very much, Andrew, for suggesting that this session could take place, and indeed we have the technology to do it these days. It's wonderful. In a way, it bridges the distance across islands and creates a virtual archipelago, and it's an archipelago of learning that hopefully will expand our horizons more so if we really use it in order to understand each other's predicament. So thank you very much for this opportunity. It's also great to have islanders at the other end, or wannabe islanders, or people who are about to become islanders. I think it's always important to appreciate and acknowledge that is a form of identity that's very much underplayed these days. And that's perhaps a little comment that I would like to start off with. It sometimes is fairly difficult to come across as an island scholar. People raise their eyebrows, academics would question whether there is indeed such a thing as island studies. So, be prepared. Don't go out there in the world and expect everybody to gush over you and congratulate you for becoming experts in island studies. It takes some convincing. Well, I am convinced, for sure. And I'm convinced because it speaks to my own reality. I am born and bred on the island of Malta. Malta is 20 miles long and 12 miles wide, bang in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. It's 24 degrees right now out there. It's sunny. And of course, Malta is not just an island. It's actually an archipelago. There are 3 inhabited islands in Malta. The bigger one is called Malta, which is a common situation in many places. The big island takes the name of, or gives the name to, the archipelago. But then there's Gozo with 30,000 inhabitants, and Comino with 2 inhabitants. So it is an archipelago. But of course, Malta is also a state. It's a small state. It's one of 2 small states in the Mediterranean Sea, the other one being Cyprus. And therefore, our reality is conditioned as much as by the geographical, reality, the geographical materiality of being a piece of land surrounded by water, as much as by its political status. Malta being a sovereign state since 1964, former British colony, of course. The pride and joy of the British Navy for many years, home of the Mediterranean Fleet, etc. But since 64, an independent state. Since 74, a republic. So we've ditched the Queen, with all respect. Since 2004, member of the European Union as well. So we're one of the 27 members of the EU. So this complicates matters a bit, but nevertheless, I think it's a very important frame of reference that allows me to, in a way, walk the talk. And I certainly have no need to explain why I'm interested in islands. Now, Andrew, of course, asked me to speak about governance today. So hopefully this will help to create a kind of a conclusion, a kind of a closure to your course. It is a course about island futures, isn't it?
Well, that's one of the modules. This one is actually specifically about island governance, yeah. And,
all right.
But certainly, because of what's happening in the Northern Isles today, also about potential futures that we might be facing as well.
Exactly. So in a way, I was going to use that excuse to launch myself into a foray of potential scenarios for islands, with special reference to the North Atlantic and the islands to the north of Scotland, there, northwest and east of Scotland. And we'll see how it goes. Of course, you will have to appreciate my ignorance of things local and specific. I am no authority on Scotland, let alone on the Orkneys or Shetland or the Western Isles. But perhaps, and hopefully this is the advantage of having the island lens, right? What I will say will strike a chord, will have a resonance with your own reality. And by all means, feel free to flesh out the specifics of how what I may be saying perhaps on a generic level, how those generic suggestions and arguments may play out on a very local level. I would very much look forward to that. So, Andrew has already addressed the island enclaves. That remains to me my most definitive self-authored work in the last decade. Most of my other stuff is edited, and perhaps some of you may appreciate why I have dedicated so much time and effort to editing books rather than authoring books, because in that way I build my own island studies community. There are now dozens, if not hundreds of people who have collaborated in my projects, many of whom have been publishing projects, but of course not exclusively so. There is also Island Studies Journal, by the way. So again, I am editing that journal. I've been editing that journal since its foundation in 2006. It's completely freely downloadable off the website, www.islandstudies.ca/journal. And of course, if you Google Island Studies, the journal comes up probably as #1. So it's very well reviewed, and it has been fairly well received because it is now basically the platform for critical engagement of island scholarship. But back to island enclaves. To put it brief, what I've tried to do in that book, and I hope you agree with me, is to present a methodology for analyzing how islands try to play the game at a regional or even at an international level, in spite of the attributes that are often lumped on them by scholars, but even sometimes by their own politicians. So we start off from a position which is very much the position adopted by organizations like AOSIS, for instance, AOSIS being the Alliance of Small and Island States, that has become extremely vocal at the United Nations. Associations like SIDS, which is the grouping of small island developing states within the United Nations. This is the grouping that convinced the international community that they deserve their own Rio summit. There was a big summit in Rio in 1992, and the SIDS lobby, 38 members strong, I think at the time, basically convinced the United Nations General Assembly that they deserve their own forum. Because, why? Because they were small, and therefore small countries have their own particular challenges when it comes to development, and that led the way and paved the way to the first summit for SIDS in Barbados in 1994, followed by Mauritius 2005, and now later on this year, in September 2014, in Samoa. So these are the very vocal platforms for island states, and I emphasize the word state at this point. We'll come to subnational jurisdictions later. But these states have tried to make a lot out of their smallness and their vulnerability, arguing that what appear to be perhaps a healthy, economic record, like say GDP per capita or inward investment or purchasing capacity and so on, many of these are flimsy and highly volatile indicators, because you can have a hurricane, you can have a tsunami, you can have an earthquake, and suddenly all that wealth, all that affluence disappears just like that, literally overnight sometimes. This is an argument that plays out certainly in environmental terms. I have no problem with it environmentally. In economic terms, I have my doubts. And I have my doubts because islands generally have performed better than similar developing states. So if you compare small island states with small developing island states with larger developing states, then the small island state seems to have done a better job of the development challenge. And then, of course, to bring in the subnational jurisdiction piece into the jigsaw puzzle, these subnational units, what I call snidges, there's no relation to Harry Potter, by the way, and the famous snitch, okay? A snidge is simply my way of pronouncing S-N-I-J, subnational island jurisdiction. These snidges tend to do better than SIDS, again, in economic terms. So we try to move away from that situation and come more face-to-face with the reality, which is a reality where the playing of in and out, the playing of being onshore and offshore, just to give you an example, the ability to be within a system, but at the same time not fully part of that system. These, I think, are part of the games that islands can play to great perfection. Why? Because it pays. Why? Because it works. Why? Because you can get away with it. Why? Because usually larger players will either not bother or, indeed, they may actually appreciate that they are also in a position to take advantage of those games. Because it always takes two to tango, right? It's not just about the capacity of an island to show that it has carved out for itself a niche. The ability to exploit that niche will depend, and I emphasize and bold the word will depend on take-up by external players. Why? Again, usually the domestic market is too small for any niche to be fulfilled simply out of domestic demand. I know I may be using economic terms here, but I also mean them in a political sense, okay? So the whole idea, therefore, is, in island enclaves, let us present for analysis a new category, snidges, very diverse category. You can find snidges all over the world, tropical, temperate, frigid, Arctic, Antarctic, all continents, etc. In fact, they are even more diverse than small island developing states, because practically all small island developing states are tropical jurisdictions. Iceland, for example, Iceland being the only non-warm water sovereign island state in the world today, right? Greenland may join later, but not yet. So we are in a situation where we have a whole diverse category of candidates, which, however, uncannily share a similar approach to how they maneuver their way throughout for their own development needs. So it is a challenge that speaks to their ability to exploit their governance capabilities. It is a challenge that also involves their ability to exploit their place, even, for example, in relation to tourism, in relation to marketing, in relation to branding local goods. It is a situation that allows these snidges to also exploit the in-betweenity. It's another word I like to use. The in-betweenity of their space, because sometimes the niche that they offer is their location. Location in itself is an economic asset, right? And it is also an asset that allows people from outside, possibly, to interest themselves in that place and therefore move in as newcomers to the resident community. So we're talking about culture here, we're talking about politics, we're talking about economics, but I think essentially it boils down to governance. And to prove that it boils down to governance, I just want to take you very quickly to the three main models of island, of the way in which island economies tend to work in the world today, and explain what I mean by that. The most popular model, certainly until the mid-90s, has been the Bertram and Waters model. Jeff Bertram and Roy Waters, economists out of Victoria University in Wellington, New Zealand. So what they were really looking at are the small South Pacific microstates, and what they presented, and it certainly has seemed to be fairly attractive because it's been studied and restudied over and over again, is the acronym MIRAB, which stands for two economic dynamics that explain the economic survival of many small island jurisdictions. Not only in the South Pacific, by the way, but possibly even in the North Atlantic. MIRIB stands for two different but parallel dynamics. MI standing for migration. So migration becomes an economic strategy by a small island on the basis of which it exports its people somewhere else. And those people, of course, being homesick and nostalgic, or perhaps even being indebted or dependent on their home communities and families, they will compensate those communities, their own home island, by sending remittances back. And that inflow of capital, in cash or in kind, or both, of course, can contribute significantly to the economic development of those communities. Usually it's consumer goods or educational goods that money is used for. People pay their college fees with remittances. People perhaps make renovations to their homes, or people buy white goods like automobiles, televisions, etc., with money coming in from their relatives who are happily working and settled elsewhere. So that's part of the MIRAB dynamic. The other dynamic, which is not a household-to-household flow, but a state-to-state flow, is the AB at the very end. So MI stands for migration, R stands for remittances, that's one flow. The other flow, A for aid, this is state-to-state aid, usually bilateral, but possibly even multilateral. And B meaning basically bureaucracy. So here, aid at a state level, at a political level, is funneled to support public sector employment, essentially. A better acronym, perhaps, instead of MIRAB would be Mirage, where the where the B for bureaucracy is replaced by GE, which means government employment. And of course, the person who concocted this term also meant it to mean that it's a very flimsy development model, right? It is a mirage, because it basically exonerates the local government, whatever that may be, national, regional, municipal, from ownership over the processes and practices that allow the MIRAB dynamics to take place. The only thing that a MIRAB-based economy or a mirage-based economy does, proactively, is to actually encourage migration, for example, or to encourage destination governments to accept its migrants, right? So that's one economic model that works. The second model is the site model, SITE, and this is where tourism comes in with a bang. And I think this all speaks to the growth of the global tourism industry and how islands have generally capitalized on this. There are now millions of people who descend seasonally, perhaps, or in a more permanent ways by buying second homes on island tourism destinations. You have the whole island paradise myth and the exoticization of island destinations. And this, of course, has contributed to a considerable inflow of capital, mainly to tourism receipts, but also to, of course, associated problems: environmental degradation, pollution, waste management, you name it. Tourism comes with its own strings. Nevertheless, there are islands that have become, again, possibly reactively, not necessarily out of a policy choice, but tourism has become the economic choice by default in a way. When all other things fail, when manufacturing investment disappears, when you don't have anything else to compete with, tourism is the panacea which allows you to plug the gaps, and in a relatively fast way, with relatively little investment. Sun, sand, and sea, of course, are free. So, you just start putting up a few hotels, make sure you have a decent runway, and then the whole thing basically takes care of itself. Particularly in the Caribbean, but increasingly in the Indian Ocean and the South Pacific, and of course, the world's first playground, the Mediterranean. Millions of tourists spend considerable amount of time on islands, usually on a seasonal basis, but even that is changing, I think, with the growth of niche tourism in winter. So the site model, I think, explains a lot. It departs from the aid or the mendicant syndrome. We have a fully fledged industry now explaining success in many small islands. But okay, that does not explain everything, and again, there's very little governance associated with this model, other than, of course, the state making sure that it's a stable platform, there are no terrorist activities, the place is safe for tourists, and you encourage people to set up their hotels, their restaurants, their amusement platforms, etc., to create a fun experience. And then of course we come to the third model, which is the one that I proposed back in 2006, I think, following the encouragement of none other than Jeff Bertrand himself. So I proposed the profit model. And this is a clear departure from the other two, where I don't focus so much on flows or one particular sector. It's rather the ability to derive policies, suitable policies, that create a particular niche, that create a particular ambience to an island in order to make it attractive to people, attractive to investment. And the profit model, of course, depends on people management skills. In this case, it's not an export of people that we're interested in, it's rather the import of people. It's the import of the right people. It's the import of people who are a decent fit with the economic but also the cultural lifestyle of the island. It's about resource management, and this is extremely important. By resource management, I have environmental resources in mind particularly. You don't want to transform your island into a wasteland, even if that means relinquishing fast buck. Island spaces and landscapes and natural ecosystems need to be preserved, if anything, to maintain a decent quality of life for people who want to go and live there. Thirdly is overseas engagement, and this is where the paradiplomatic arguments come in. There is nothing today keeping snidges from also engaging in diplomatic relations. We have some islands that are leading the way, including, for example, Faroes and Greenland, both of whom find the Danish government very accommodating in allowing them an international presence and role through the Danish embassies and consulates. So that's the O. Then we have FI again, which is finance, banking, insurance. I still believe that there is a role for small islands to play there, in spite of the crackdown by the G8 and the OECD and the EU in trying to regulate this fairly elusive industry. There will always remain a space for transactions, economic transactions, which are a competitive advantage of small jurisdictions, by the way. Nothing beats that. And finally, Tier 4 transport. The lifeblood of islands, as I was discussing with Andrew earlier this morning. We're talking about the ferry. Depending on the scale of the island, of course, but usually islands depend on transportation for their very survival. The very rhythm of an island's life depends on the coming and going of the ferry, right? Very often it is the schedule that determines everything else. Whether you're going shopping, whether you're going to work, whether you're going to school, whether you're expecting a visitor, whether you have to leave to meet a visitor or to take a plane from somewhere else. Assuming you don't have an airport, the ferry becomes even more important. Right, so transportation, sea transportation and or air transportation becomes a very important policy field with which there are clear relations, I think, with the other areas that we've spoken about. So people management skills, environmental management skills, finance, overseas engagement, none of these would be possible without some fairly reliable and decent transport infrastructure. So that encapsulates the profit model. Now, what I'm trying to do now, in anticipation of a paper I have to present in September at a conference, I'm trying to look at these three models within a broader context. So I want to go back before MIRB, and I want to explore more the economic, perhaps historical or even prehistorical circumstances that predate the MIRB economy, possibly even to pre-colonial times. And at the other end, and keeping in mind the Island Futures topic of your course, what is the future after profit? Is there a future after profit? Apart from these three models, can we conceptualize new models? What are the signs of the times? Is the 20th century showing us that islands need to develop in different ways? For instance, the new information and communication technologies. Are they permitting a new type of economic commerce from islands and for islands? One that, of course, usurps the tyranny of space, distance, and peripherality. I think this is an important field. It's already being pioneered by a number of indigenous and fairly enterprising firms from islands. I had the pleasure some years ago in being involved in a European Union Leonardo da Vinci project looking at real business stories, real stories of small business success. And Shetland and Skye were two of the 11 islands involved in the study. And the UHI Millennium Institute, as it was known at the time, was very much involved. And we were looking at places that, to an observer from outside, would be extremely unlikely to find on a small island. So just to give you an example here, Geltec. Are you familiar with Geltec?
Heard the name.
All right. So Geltec is a high-tech company based in Skye, not mistaken, producing medical products, fairly sophisticated stuff like nanologgers.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes. Let me see. Here we are. Yes, it's in Dunvegan, so it's in the northwest of the Isle of Skye. Geltec. This is what a nanologger looks like. So it's a fairly compact instrument that measures heart rate, pressure, pulse. I don't know. your state of health. Basically, I'm not a doctor, so I wouldn't be able to elaborate. It's extremely compact, and it's produced out of an innocuous-looking shack in the middle of nowhere. And the people who set it up there, of course, take pride in the fact that it's in the middle of nowhere because it is a conscious decision. It was a conscious decision to set up the operation there because it allows the people there a certain type of quality of life. Of course, it is a place that's very well connected, even by a bridge these days, to the mainland. So connectivity, again, is extremely important, as I have just said. So I think I've spoken enough by myself. I want to open the discussion. I've kind of given you a quick overview of the whole point of putting together island enclaves. In summary, it is, I think, a very exciting field where islands play with the notion of being in and out, inside and outside. In another paper, I speak about endotopias and exotopias, which are two fairly sophisticated words of basically saying the same thing, right? Being in and being out, being tropes that allow a management of space in a way that limits access. So you are in and out, as long as you can limit access. And of course, all boundaries are about access. Boundaries are about openings as much as they are about closures. They're always like that. If you have a door is both something to keep people in, but also to keep people out, or whatever. If not people, something else. So I think islands allow themselves these days, thanks again to transportation, thanks again to modern technology, they are better able to play this game. To their own satisfaction, I think. We must remember that one of the litmus tests of island governance is probably the ability to maintain a permanent population. Right? It's
Absolutely.
a fairly scientific measuring tool. If you don't agree with me, let me know. But islands that are depopulated, I think, are those islands that have lost the game. They have lost the game. They've lost their population, and therefore you lose your population, you lose your voting clout. You no longer matter in the grand scheme of things at a regional level, at a national level, and that of course becomes a vicious cycle. So it then becomes more difficult to re-engage. And the likely scenario in that field would then be you become a nature reserve. And that's the predicament of various islands around the world that have been depopulated. So, okay, I'll just open the discussion to the floor. If you have any questions or comments, I'm all ears.
Well, my goodness, lots of interesting stuff there to discuss. Well, talking about snidge, I was always wondered how it was pronounced. That's a that's a nice, easy way of pronouncing it. Well, since I'm living on a snidge at the moment, there's a lot of what you said is highly relevant because Orkney and Shetland and the Western Isles are involved in a move to increase their powers, and they're actually involved in a sort of para-diplomatic way with the Scottish Government and Westminster and Brussels to see what they can do to increase their competency. And they've had a big conference and they've looked at various other options, like being like the Faroe Islands or the Ormond Islands. So it's all highly relevant. So what do you think we'll just start with Orkney and Shetland, then the Western Isles, and their potential futures. If you were living here, where would you want to see things go? What sort of competencies would you like the islands to have?
All right, I see you have, is that the Shetland flag on your desk?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Let's start with Shetland then. Of course, Shetland complicates things in the sense that we're talking about archipelagos there. So already there is a certain dynamic. There is an urban core, Lerwick, Callaway, and possibly part of the municipal politics obviously has to do with maintaining sustainable communities in the rest of the archipelago, right? So how do you do that? You do that possibly by encouraging niche tourism in those places, farm-based tourism, adventure-based tourism, etc. You try to encourage investment in small-scale manufacturing operations, for example. You try to maintain an influx of local capital through events that generate good quality of life, theater, dance, music, festivals. All these are very important things. I know that you are extremely well endowed, well equipped. You used your local capacity, I think, very, very ingeniously through the Zetland Development Act and the setting up of the Shetland Local Council and its links with oil and gas revenue. So, and again, going back to the population figures, I think when you look at the demographics in Shetland, certainly, I'm not sure about Orkney, but certainly in Shetland, it seems that you are holding on, you are increasing your population, slowly but steadily, and that population is still fairly well dispersed across the archipelago, if I'm not mistaken. So, you use that as a kind of a litmus test of the success or otherwise of development policies. I'm also interested, I want to pick up a little bit, Andrew, your point about Shetland and Orkney, looking at other places, you mentioned Faroes, I think, and Åland, in order to try to assess how can they increase their capacity. It's always useful, and of course we can't avoid this, it's human nature. We try to look at models or potential models and see how we can pick and choose perhaps aspects of their own development and ascribe them to our own development agenda. I'm not sure whether at the very end of the scale there is indeed sovereignty. I mean, that's a question I would pose. Remember, today we have sovereign states that have a population of 10,000 people. Right? So if we were posing this question 20 years ago, many people would say, yeah, you're too small to be a sovereign state. Shetland, sovereign state, forget it. Orkney, Shetland, sovereign state, don't even think about it. That question these days would be answered differently. There are now at least 3 small states that have a population less than that of Shetland. Okay, this is a quiz question. Let's see how many of your students know the answer to this question.
Come on then, folks.
Is there an island called New or Noon or something in the Southwest Pacific?
Well, Ian, you are Ian, right? Even though Robert Newton comes up on the screen.
Yeah, yes, I'm known as Ian.
All right, good. So Niue is it's a snidge actually. It's not a sovereign state, so I'm sorry to disappoint you. It's part of New Zealand. It's not independent.
Well, what about Kiribati?
Kiribati is indeed a sovereign state, but its population is about 100,000 people.
Ah.
So
withdraw.
population-wise, it's bigger than Shetland.
Tuvalu springs to mind.
Yes, very well.
Nauru.
That's one correct answer, Nicholas. You have 50 points. Tuvalu. Tuvalu is the former Ellis Islands. Right? Part of the Gilbert and Ellis Islands. It was a former British colony. And when Britain signaled that it wanted to give independence to the Gilberts, which by the way are today's Kiribati, the Ellis Islanders lobbied successfully to separate from the Gilberts and become their own sovereign state. So yes, they were the second smallest sovereign state to be set up in the South Pacific. Which would be the first? It would be Nauru. Nauru, Nauru. It's a very interesting example of a single island sovereign state with a population of about 10, 11,000 people. For a time, it was the richest country in the world on a per capita basis, but they made a big mess of their wealth. You look it up, look up the details if you're interested. And very recently, they've even been called a failed state. They have been unable to fulfill even basic financial obligations. Mm-hmm. So Nauru will be the second. The third one, also in the Pacific, is Palau. So Palau is one of the former so-called compact states in the Pacific. Palau, along with the Marshall Islands and the Federated States of Micronesia, were entrusted to the United States post the Second World War because they had been territories occupied by Japan, and following the Second World War, of course, Japan lost those territories, and the United States took them over in trust. And that trust relationship eventually matured to independence, but it's a kind of independence where the United States continues to represent those states in international relations. This is one of the examples of the fuzzy space between being a sovereign and a non-sovereign entity, right? So Palau, along with the Federated States of Micronesia and the Marshall Islands, are hybrid jurisdictions. They have a seat at the United Nations, so notionally they are sovereign, but they have hived off their diplomatic and international relations functions to the United States. So there you are. You have at least 3 countries in the world today that have populations smaller than Shetland. And they are countries.
But are the examples that Shetland would want to copy, though? That's the thing.
Well, in some respects, possibly yes, because Palau may be having the cake and eating it too, right? It is notionally sovereign. Even juridically, it is sovereign. It is recognized by the UN. But the United States plays a key role. It plays an exclusive role in its diplomatic representation, and also, of course, pumps the country with a huge influx of money on a regular basis. Plus, the Palauans have free entry to the United States. So if they want to leave and settle on the on US territory, they can do that as well. It's a right that they enjoy by virtue of being just 20,000 people.
Well, I suppose that's certainly an option. I don't think the current debate certainly hasn't. The 3 island councils, Orkney, Shetland, and the Western Isles, haven't considered that as an option. Nick, you're the one that's looking at the our islands, our futures. What's your what comments have you got?
First of all, I'll say that as you were describing the status that Palau has. I was thinking you're getting into areas where it's really a declaration of what your status is, because what you were describing was not far removed from the status of the Faroe Islands now, where Denmark has retained responsibility for certain things, and there's been a gradual shift of power to the Faroe Islands, yet it is not a sovereign nation. It remains part of Denmark. But Palau giving or permitting the US to to carry forward its foreign policy and so forth, but to be called sovereign, it's really a matter of international treaty, international recognition at that level. I was struck by that as you said it. Certainly, our islands are future. Now, there's no suggestion at the moment of the idea of sovereignty for the Scottish island groups. It's a part of a growing process, I would imagine. I see it as the three main archipelagos in Scotland it's a very audacious and timely manoeuvre based on the existence of the independence debate within Scotland to obtain recognition or to make sure that the voice is heard. How far it goes from there is arguable. This is, I would imagine, I see it as a first step, which would then be built upon a sort of declaration of competence, if you like, a declaration that the island groups want to control their futures here, and where it goes from there will depend on how successful this is and how well whatever powers are granted are coped with and managed.
Yes, I think you are spot on there. The situation of the Faroes with Denmark is fairly similar to that of Palau with the United States, except perhaps that Copenhagen is keener to offload, if I might use that word, to offload the Faroes and see it eventually as a sovereign state in full terms.
That's an interesting perspective. I have terms.
Yes, I consider the United States, like France, by the way, to be an imperial power, interested in maintaining a presence, basically in every ocean in the world. France has the same policy. So yes, your point about declaration of competence, it's fairly straightforward and easy, perhaps, for an entity like a municipality to declare its competences. Now, much depends on how that declaration is met, whether it's met by counter declarations, whether it's met by dismissal, whether it's met by silence, right? I would give more attention perhaps to the reaction, to the response of that declaration than the mere statement of the declaration itself. I'm not sure whether we're in agreement there.
Yes, I think I would agree with that. But it is the response that you get will be factored by or in some part determined by the authority there is behind your declaration, the skill in which you present it, and the arguments that you put, and the depth of argument, the number of papers, the number of different positions that have been created in the Our Islands, Our Future debate is really impressive. And we're beginning to see as well, I mean, tomorrow night there is a meeting at Mariel, the Arts Centre in Shetland, to inform and get feedback from the population of Shetland on where our islands, our future is as far as they're regarded, and that's being live broadcast over the internet. So I shall be sitting watching that in Orkney as I have an interest in it, and 7:30 tomorrow night that's being broadcast. So that's a symptom of factor of some of the other things you were talking about earlier, the connectivity that the islands are seeing. Connectivity used to just mean the hard connections, the planes and ferries. Now it's a very different term. And
of course, and keeping the Faroe Islands in mind, of course, they have used Danish money to actually build bridges and tunnels that connect almost the whole Faroese archipelago now. But back to your point.
Yeah, that's something that interests me. Sorry, carry on.
No, it's all right. Sorry, carry on.
No, that's something that interests me as well. I mean, one of the great features of Orkney in particular since the Second World War has been the depopulation of the smaller islands and the move from the remote parts of mainland into Kirkwall, into the capital. Yes. And it's only I live on Shappensea, which is 25-minute ferry ride from Kirkwall. It would be geologically reasonably easy with political will to join Shappensea to mainland in the same way as the South Isles are joined with the causeways, the Churchill barriers. Yes. And I wonder, to maintain a viable community, these things are worth investigating. As you can see in the Faroe Islands, the commitment to the smaller islands through the connections either by tunnel or helicopter are impressive.
Agree. Of course, you have to take on board the implications of getting an island much closer to an urban center, because in that way, if there are any specific idiosyncrasies in the way in which that island has developed, those differences are likely to be evened out and possibly lost following better connectivity, right? I mean, it's a debate.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have our smaller island Gozo is 5 miles away from the mainland, and there are huge debates about whether Malta and Gozo should be connected by a fixed link, possibly a tunnel, possibly a bridge, while at the same time, of course, the Gozatans, that's how the people of Gozo are referred to, the Gozatans are keen to maintain their status as a special region. And I keep telling them, you can't be a region if you are then connected to Malta. You have to choose.
Yeah, that's a debate that is taking place. Well, it used to take place in Shetland as well about Bressa, but they've shelved they finally shelved the idea of a fixed link to Bressa because they spent a lot of money in the wrong way, and they also had to pay a lot of fines because they didn't do their paperwork properly. So it looks as if that has been shelved. But there was a debate about that, whether the life of the people in Bressa would be changed. So there would cease to be Bressans, there would just be part of Lerwick, in fact. So, which brings us to identity. A lot of the people like myself and Nick and Joanna and Lynn, when she moves up, are islanders by choice rather than by identity. But surely it must be important, there's no point in having the move to some sort of self-governance is predicated on the idea that you're a bit different from somebody else. So, in your opinion, how important is the maintenance or the creation of sort of special island identities?
It's interesting that you refer both to maintenance and creation. Because up to a certain point, identity can and is usually also constructed and manufactured. And this is where the politics and the cultural renaissance or expression of a place feed into its geography, right? The geography, of course, provides a basis for that identity. It seems fairly natural for many people who live on islands to see themselves as living on an island. But when you superimpose on that geography a sense of shared history, perhaps a different language or a different dialect of a language, perhaps even a common enemy, whoever that may be, Edinburgh, London, Brussels, I see you smiling, so obviously it makes some sense. The more these things happen, the more the outcome is going to be a shared sense of identity. And then, of course, being a jurisdiction allows you to equip yourself with that identity as a resource, and you can take that further. I mean, this town hall meeting that Nick has referred to, taking place tomorrow, it is a clear manifestation of political identity, but at the same time even cultural identity, in a context where you have an unfolding situation. There is an important referendum going on in Scotland in September, isn't it? And I've already read that. So your publicity is effective to the sense that even I in Malta know that many people in Scotland may be interested in independence, but at the same time, many people in Shetland and Orkney are not that keen on independence, and they are wondering what will happen if the result of the referendum is a yes. Will the votes in Shetland and Orkney be taken into consideration? So if there is a majority of a no in Shetland and Orkney, will that matter in the final result or not? I would imagine that's part of the debate that is going on right now. And it's a very important question. I mean, the very fact that the question has been raised and that it's out there already speaks to the clout, the ability of the Shetlanders and the Orcadians to determine, in a way, the agenda. Because, of course, they may not control the outcome of the agenda, but at least that item is certainly on the agenda, and I give you credit for that.
I just want to suggest that perhaps the announcement this week that Cornwall would have its own identity was a kind of signal to Orkney and Shetland that if these other parts of the UK can have their own identity, then perhaps the islands can too. It seemed too much of a coincidence, the timing.
Yeah, the timing is quite propitious. I
That's a
agree.
good.
Cornwall is certainly an interesting case. Last week, I also had the privilege. I had lunch with a senator from Jersey who was visiting Malta, and he has been instrumental in semi-officially coming up with what he calls a Plan B. So if the United Kingdom, if London becomes a bit too intrusive in Jersey affairs, particularly in relation to its finance industry, the Jersey men, the Jersey people, are basically coming up with a scenario. It's a what-if scenario that also allows them to engage with the possibilities of fully fledged independence. Right? So people are taking initiatives, and of course the breakup of the so far United Kingdom. I mean, we can talk about a disunited kingdom, right? At least in principle. That breakup, I'm sure, is going to have repercussions all across the British Isles. Whether it's the Channel Islands, the Isle of Man, possibly even Wales, Northern Ireland, possibly, even though Northern Ireland, I think, is the one most threatened, perhaps, by division and fragmentation. So yes, certainly, one thing leads to another, and this is politics. This is a moving target, and things change sometimes on a daily basis.
Godfrey,
That's a
it's
good answer.
Lynn on the Isle of Man.
Yes,
I was
Linda.
just wondering what you thought would happen to the Crown dependencies, the three that exist now. What do you think their futures will look like?
I think the situation in Man is fairly similar to the one in the Channel Islands, in the sense that there is a considerable dependence on finance industry. Of course, the City of London, again, this is very interesting because even within the UK, of course, there are considerable tensions. City of London plays a very important role in maintaining places like the Isle of Man functioning, because it does a great service for them. So we are talking about a fluid situation. Of course, should Scotland become independent, that already creates what I refer to as a horizon of possibilities. So many people are so far refusing even to consider the possibility that Scotland could become an independent state. Should that happen, suddenly things that were, off the table are suddenly on the table. And don't be surprised if there is a domino effect. Because the United Kingdom will change. Wales, we spoke about a pecking order earlier. Wales usually looks at Scotland. Northern Ireland looks at Wales. So, things are going to be moving around in this big chess game. I have no idea how they will move around, but I think they will.
Yeah, there's been a lot of cooperation on various aspects of governance between the three islands. So I was just wondering whether you thought they might actually combine together, because they all have their niche areas and they're all sort of like turning into particular areas of the finance industry.
Well, one thing about island jurisdictions is that they don't like to cooperate. I'm sorry to say this, but I think it's borne out by the evidence. Even places that, look at the Federation of the West Indies, right? It made a lot of economic sense back in the late 50s to bunch all the small residues of the British Commonwealth in the Caribbean together as one archipelagic state. But Jamaica went its own way, Trinidad and Tobago went its own way, then Barbados went its own way, and then, of course, nothing could stop the rest. So nationalism, even at that small scale, some may call it petty nationalism, but it's still nationalism.
Well, there were letters in the Shetland Times when our islands our futures idea was mooted. There were letters saying, well, why are we joining with Orkney, and particularly the Western Isles, to do this? Shouldn't we do it ourselves?
Exactly. Yes. It's been referred to as the Tuvalu effect in the literature. For 10,000 Tuvaluans to refuse to become independent with the Gilbertese and risk navigating the world as their own sovereign state, that speaks a lot. That speaks volumes.
It certainly does. I've got a question about Malta. I know it's an independent state, but in a way, is it not a bit like a snidge as well when you compare as part of the EU?
Absolutely. With the added on federal level of governance to Malta, it's been a completely new experience for us. We're celebrating 10 years of EU membership, so there's quite a conversation going on nationally to come to terms with the process of Europeanization. And this, I think, is one of the hallmarks of that experience. We have never had an experience of working at multi-level governance. It's completely new. Even our municipalities were only introduced in 1994. So for 30 years after independence, there was only one level of governance, the national one. And that was it. No need for alliances or coalitions in our government, by the way, because we have only two parties represented in parliament. So it is an obvious majority situation for the winning party. No need for alliances. So yes, we are finding ourselves now forced to navigate a fairly new political field. In some respects, it's working well. So the ability to milk money out of Brussels and to use it effectively in various projects, I think it's working well. But in relation, for example, to clandestine migration, we are only 200 miles away from Libya, 150 miles away from Tunisia. So we are the bulwark, the southern bulwark of the European Union. And we do get boatloads of clandestine, illegal, undocumented migrants moving into Maltese waters and then being picked up by our Coast Guard. We are arguing that Europe needs to bear and share these immigrants. It is not fair that the country where these immigrants land gets to keep those immigrants for indefinitely, basically, and certainly for as long as they take to apply and get asylum status. We think this is very unfair. So there's a certain bitterness about the way in which the EU is playing its own game, but at the same time, on different policy fields, there's some appreciation that at least we think that we are benefiting from membership.
If you can generalise, do you think in the world of practical politics, small sovereign island states with their need to engage in relationships with other states have more jurisdiction or less jurisdiction than snidges with a formal link with one metropole, but perhaps in practice greater freedom than very small sovereign states?
I think the devil's in the detail, Ian. I can think of various examples of sovereign states that have in a way forfeited their sovereignty through mismanagement or sometimes through sheer bad luck, an environmental disaster. I mean, take for example Montserrat. Montserrat, which remains a British UK overseas territory, Montserrat was slated for independence in the mid-90s. And then, of course, Soufrière blew up. The whole population had to be evacuated. 1/3 of the island became a no-go space. In fact, Montserrat is a full member of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, even though it is not a state. And the reason for that is because when it joined, it was on the way to becoming a sovereign state, and nobody in those days imagined that progress would be reversed. But of course, a volcano changed everything.
Fascinating. I've got something. It's not an island so much as a Scottish question. Do you think the way that the debate that's taking place in Scotland at the moment is old-fashioned? Because I mean,
Sorry,
as you
what's
just
the question again?
do you think the independence debate in Scotland is old-fashioned? Because you've suggested, that in the post-colonial times everyone was assuming they were going to become a state, and that was the goal. And now some of the island states, the island snidges that never achieved that goal, they don't want to become independent states. They just want to milk it, as you were. So from a Maltese perspective, just looking at what's happening in Scotland, not the islands so much, but just Scotland, which is half of an island, I suppose. Does it strike you as progressive or sort of old-fashioned in a way?
That's a good question. By the way, there are maps that reproduce Scotland as an island. Some medieval maps, I believe, and a colleague of mine, Phil Steinberg, who I think now is working in Durham, So he's an American but working out of Durham. And he's actually gone into some interesting debates about how borderlands tended to be islanded in medieval cartography. But that's a different point. Let me get to your question. Is the pursuit of independence old-fashioned? There was a recent election in Quebec, I think last month, in the province of Quebec in Canada. And it was called by the minority government, which was the sovereigntist party in power. They thought it was a good time to call a snap election and secure a majority. All the polls were showing that it would secure a majority. Then one of the star candidates of the Parti Québécois, the local sovereigntist party, started banging on the table, raising the fist and talking about an independence Quebec. And suddenly the polls started showing a different trend. And by the time the election took place, the minority party that had been in power lost the election. And the Liberals are now back in power in Quebec. And the Liberals, of course, stand for a united Canada. So what am I trying to say? What I'm trying to say is that perhaps these days, the notion of nationalism, the emotive argument, right? So the passion associated with being in charge, being in control, being master of your own fate, come what may, doesn't resonate as strongly as it did perhaps in the heyday of nationalism. By the heyday of nationalism, I mean basically the 60s and the early 70s, when 60, 70 different colonies fought for, in many cases, they fought for, for independence from their sovereign power. Islands have, as you know from Island Enclaves, if you've read the book, islands have, especially the smaller ones, they have been more busily engaged in trying to forestall independence than actually working for it. And by the way, Malta as well. The decision for Malta to become independent in 1964 was very much a decision taken by Britain that decided to interpret the independence referendum in a certain way. There was a huge non-response. There was a fair number of the local population, the voting population, that did not vote in that referendum, but yet Britain decided to respect the result in spite of a 40% non-show. And that result was then, of course, one in favor of independence, and they decided to go along with that. But Maltese politicians, for many years, were busily engaged in extending the presence of the British naval base in Malta in order to secure an economic lifeline to the new country. And Britain only left Malta effectively in 1979. So we are talking about a process that definitely has a passionate, emotional, a heart-based appeal to it, but the more kind of sober, more economic argument is increasingly being looked upon when it comes to taking decisions. Let me just use another example here, Bermuda. Bermuda is now Britain's largest overseas territory, population getting close to 100,000, rich. They don't need Britain to provide it with funds. They can very well finance themselves if they went their own way. Bermuda actually set up Bermuda actually set up an independence commission recently, and they had a fairly distinguished panel doing their research and coming up with their recommendations. And the recommendations is basically status quo. We're doing well. Sovereignty has its attractions, but those attractions do not compensate for the economic risks involved in cutting up our links with London and the United Kingdom. Why? Because those links provide both a supervisory role and also a guarantor role on our operations. If something goes wrong, the Queen can come in to restore order or what have you, as it had to do with places like the Turks and Caicos or the Cayman Islands, right, who have been a bit naughty in how they've used their jurisdictional power. So it's useful to have that backdrop, that kind of, the patron looking at you from a certain distance, who can, however, come in, possibly even rescinding the constitution in order to put things right. And that is seen as a useful prop, a useful device by external players. This is not just about the relationship between an island and the mainland. This is also about third parties. Third parties are extremely important. If you're dealing with financiers, you're dealing with investors, you must consider that as well in charting your policy going forward.
Yeah,
Does that
I'm
answer
still
your
voting
question?
yes. Right, yes, excellent. Right, there must be some more questions out there. I know there are people itching to get in.
Okay, I just want to ask from Wales, to what extent do mindsets come into the success or lack of making a success when it comes to island communities? Do you feel that it all comes down to people, how they feel about themselves, how they view themselves, how they perceive themselves?
Absolutely, absolutely. There are two key words that need to come together, and they need to work in tandem, and these are both competence and confidence. So you need to have the smart, the clever politicians, the clever top civil servants, the top entrepreneurs, the investors, actual or potential, who of course come together. There's usually a small, tightly knit business economic elite on many of these islands that we're talking about. These are people who meet on a regular basis. They probably are married into each other's families and so on. So this elite, it's important that they shrewdly assess the situation, pros and cons, opportunities and threats. But at the same time, the general population would do well to generate for themselves a sense of confidence that they can actually make it, right? That they can actually survive, that they can navigate in an ocean that is increasingly turbulent and increasingly unknown. And one thing feeds into the other. If you embark on certain practices that end up to have been successful, then that confidence breeds confidence. Just to quote some examples from Malta, we have in the last 10 or 15 years developed a number of economic niches that were completely unimaginable 10, 20 years ago. One of them is electronic gaming, for instance. Malta is the only EU jurisdiction that has legislation that supports electronic gaming, and we now have 6,000 jobs in that industry. Aquaculture is now big. Malta is now one of the biggest exporters of farmed tuna to Japan, and that brings a lot of money to the local economy. Generic pharmaceuticals, that is another window that we have managed to exploit. Big pharmaceutical companies who, out of neglect perhaps, failed to register their patents in Malta. Companies are now in Malta exploiting that loophole and producing generic pharmaceuticals. And these are small clusters in themselves. So, they tend to generate additional and ancillary employment. So yes, I agree with you.
You've just answered my question, which was about developing high-value commerce. Because your example in Skye, and it's great if you have the idea, but maybe we should start looking for loopholes.
Yes, again, small islands usually thrive by looking at loopholes. In the Mediterranean, many islands used to thrive in the past by virtue of piracy, right? Which is also a form of loophole. You can have a local government that actually licenses you to become a pirate, and in that way also gets a commission of your work.
I always thought the Isle of Man was a pirate.
Yeah, it is a modern piracy, but it's also fairly legitimate as well, right? It's a type of piracy that straddles the border between legality and illegality, I think. Even the way in which some of these places are referred to as tax havens, for example, suggests that they may not be playing the game fairly, but who decides whether a game is fair or not?
Well, one of the things that I've been thinking during the year as we've been doing these different courses has been about piracy, that quite a lot of what we're learning is how to understand how to be fleet of foot at the edges and how to think quickly about the situations. And it's as though Island Studies itself needs to generate another course, another module in piracy, to go to be consultants to all those small island places. Yeah.
That's a very interesting idea. I look forward to establishing a consultancy network or something of the sort.
I'll put it forward to the UHI executive office. Yeah.
But this connects with Lynn's statement earlier, I think, right? Whereby we need to develop the confidence to appreciate that we can provide advice to ourselves, to each other's islands, right? We don't necessarily have to recruit a Canadian or an Australian or an American to come parachute in our locality and tell us what we need to do.
And especially with us, the modern technology that we're using at the moment, we're building up our own island networks, and surely that's the future.
Exactly, I agree with you completely.
Can I ask a question about renewable energy?
Yes, you can.
I was just wondering if islands that focused mostly on renewable energy, whether there be a lot of negative effects on their more traditional form of economies. I'm thinking about things. I've been looking at Isla, with its wind turbines and wave arrays, but the traditional things of agriculture and fishing are taking on the back step, which kept the island going, and then the renewable energy is having a negative effect, or the locals think it's having a negative effect on things like tourism, because people expect an island to look like something, and when you've got big wind turbines and things, then it detracts from the original beauty of the island.
All right, but there's a certain, how shall I say? It's. All right. Let me turn the question on its head. Let me pose a question myself. Do electrical pylons look nice on an island? Because that's what we have right now, right? And they're very ugly. Come to think of it, the only reason why we don't complain about them anymore is because they've become part of the landscape. So you have all these huge pylons with wires all over the place, running down our streets, going across our fields, but they're part of the landscape. So part of the resistance to wind turbines, I think it's completely misplaced.
So you don't think it affects the environmental things like migration of endangered birds and things?
Now that's a different point. And of course, I'm sure that electrical pylons have their own effects on birds. From a landscape point of view, I'm not trying to avoid the question. From a landscape point of view, I appreciate that the smaller the land area, the greater the difficulty of agreeing on a site. For example, a wind farm, right? Or a solar panel farm. These places take huge expanses. In some cases, people have been arguing that they should be offshore, but that doesn't solve the problem. It just displaces the problem and may create additional problems for all we know. So yes, there is a certain difficulty, particularly with places that are small, that have limited coastlines. Most of those coastlines would be developed anyway, or preserved for their touristic, rural appeal. So yes, the location of the actual facility is, I think, an issue. But of course, islands probably have most to gain from the replacement of traditional fossil fuels and power stations with something that's more renewable. Because again, this can be borne out by statistical evidence. The cost of power on small islands, especially those that are not connected to a national grid for various reasons, the cost of power per capita on those islands is usually phenomenal. It's very, very high, right? And it's a function of the need to have economies of scale. You have to have a power station of a certain size, even though it's small, and small communities. So the cost of providing that service to a small community will be just mind-boggling. So every incentive to switch. There are some islands, of course, that are now leading the way. Places like Samso in Denmark, places like El Hierro in the Canary Islands. I think they are leading the way in not just showing that they can be carbon neutral, but actually carbon negative. They are actually exporting clean energy to their mainland.
That's certainly one of the prongs of the Islands Our Futures movement, if you want to call it that. It's because the northern and western Isles of Scotland have gigantic potential for wind and tidal and wave power. But the necessity is to have an interconnector between the islands to the mainland of the UK so that this power can be exported. And there is debate. There's debate in Shetland about whether to go ahead with the huge Viking wind farm. But I think I would suggest that the majority of people in Shetland would actually welcome the Viking wind farm because it would be seen as a huge economic benefit. It wouldn't provide, well, it'd provide as much energy as we need in Shetland, but that wouldn't really be the point. It would be the fact that we'd be able to export huge amounts of it down to the mainland and make a lot of money. And I think that seems to be one aspect in Shetland, at least, that the desire to maximise the resources to the benefit of Shetland seems to be ingrained in the population.
Andrew, I have a question for you. When Shetlanders think about the mainland, is it always Scotland or could it also be Norway?
Ah, right. Well, if you think about the mainland, it could either be the mainland of Shetland or Scotland.
Yes.
Rarely would you find them use it of Norway. In fact, I can't think of anyone that I've heard using it that way, other than perhaps in a kind of jokey sense. But they will talk about going to Scotland, though. I mean, that's part of it. I mean, so traditionally the mainland is where I'm living at the moment, the mainland of Shetland, and then it's Scotland way over there, and Norway way over there, and so yeah.
Andrew, it's a bit like Tasmania and Australia. Australia is the big island.
Yes, exactly. The island continent. And then, of course, Tasmania has its own outlying islands, right? So, for example, for a place like King Island or Great Barren Island, Tasmania is the mainland.
What part of Tasmania do you come from?
Sorry?
Lynn's from Tasmania. That's.
I see. Okay. I had the privilege of spending 2 months at the University of Tasmania a couple of years ago. It's a very beautiful island.
It is, very much, yes.
So, very, very good. Any final questions from anyone? This is your last chance.
I have a quick question. Earlier in the year, Andrew, you said something about inviting Godfrey to Shetland or Orkney for a conference. Are we going to see you here?
I hope so. There will be plans. I mean, it will happen. It will happen. It certainly will happen.
Yes. Do the students know about the RETI network?
No, I don't think so. No.
All right. So this might be a good time to say something about that.
Yes,
the University of the Highlands and Islands, with the University of Malta and about 25 other island universities around the world, are part of a network that was formally launched in 2009. The initiative came from the University of Corsica. Corsica, of course, is an island that belongs to France. So since they took the initiative, the acronym that describes the network is in French. Réseau d'Excellence de Territoire Insulaire, which basically translates as a network of excellence for island territories. And this is a grouping that so far, it started with very humble aspirations, but I think it's gaining speed and momentum. We have set in motion a number of summer schools, a number of winter schools, and an annual event that combines a symposium with a summer school. So last year's was in Italy, in Sardinia, at the University of Sassari. This year will be at Prince Edward Island in Canada from the 4th to the 9th of July. And possibly in 2015, who knows, perhaps it will be on the mainland of Shetland.
Indeed. That's what we're trying to work out. But yeah, this was the conference that you were interested in, wasn't it, Nick? The one in Prince Edward Island.
Yeah, I was. I was in Prince Edward Island. Yes, I certainly was. I don't think I'm going to be able to raise the finance to do it. It's been some inquiries are made. I haven't been able to get anything. I seem to be too old for some sources, which is a shame. And that's how it is. Another time.
All right. Looking forward to meeting you somewhere then.
So, well, with that, we'll definitely follow up the. We knew about the conference in Canada, but the other material on RETI as well, we should definitely keep our eyes focused on that as well, especially since the University of Highlands and Islands is involved in it. But there we go. Thank you very much, Godfrey. It's been great. Really nice to chat to you, and thank you very much for providing
My pleasure. And I look forward to meeting you in the flesh at some point.
Indeed. So, all the best, and thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed.
Bye.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Sorry I cut across you there, Nick. I didn't mean to.
It's all right. I was going to ask about, future of island studies and a couple of other things that I had in my head, but it'll come again another time.
It certainly will, and I'm sure Godfrey will be more than happy to engage in an email discussion with you. So send your questions on to him, or by me if you like. So thanks very much, everybody. We'll just wrap it up actually now, I think, because I know you've got essays and things to work on and pieces of work to concentrate on. So I'd just like to say thank you very much for all your efforts in the seminars. You've done extremely well. It's been really good, again, having folk who engage and are keen to read the papers and share your ideas. So it's been really it's been a satisfying module to be involved in. So thanks very much, and good luck with your final piece of work that you're all working on at the moment. I'm looking forward to looking at that, reading that. Keep in touch, just because the module's finished. I mean, you're still on the course, and the dissertation will be coming up for some of you, and others can relax until next year. But please keep in touch, and yeah, so there we go. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you all at different times. I'll be in Orkney in September for the induction of the next lot of students, and for the crowning ceremony. Well, anyway, when you get your degrees in St Magnus, so that's going to be a good event. That'll be towards the end of September. But I say, don't be strangers, and keep in touch. And if I don't speak to you much, have great holidays. Have a great summer. So,
Thanks
farewell.
a lot, Andrew. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andrew. Maybe I can catch up with you in Shetland when I might be away.
Please do. Look forward to it.
Okay.
Okay, bye. Bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, folks.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Andrew.
Bye, Ian. Bye, Nick. It's been a delight. All the best now.
Lynn, that's really good about your house.
Well,
Have we lost her?
Lynn?
oh, yeah. I've had an offer just increased while the lecture was on, and I've got to go and tell them whether I think that's enough, but I don't think it's enough, but I'm sure it's room for manoeuvre.
Well, that's beginning to be good news. That's brilliant. Well done, you.
And I've got someone looking tomorrow, so I'd perhaps like to see what they think before I accept any offers. So, woo! Both in a position to buy straight away as well. So that's good.
Sounds fantastic. So we might see you up here.
ASAP. Yeah. So I'll go
So
and
let
go.
us know.
Yeah, I'll keep you posted. I'm going to go and do my negotiations now, and hope that they'll go up a bit more, which will be helpful. It's a long way, isn't it? It's a very expensive removal.
Yes.
Okay, I shall see you in a bit. I shall keep.
Okay.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye, Lynn. See you. Are you doing courses next year, Ian?
Yes, I've got 2 to do in the Christmas term, and then I'll sort of do the dissertation between Christmas and the summer sort of thing.
Which courses are you doing in the first term?
Well, the Scottish Island course, and then I'm hoping to find something on Viking sort of history. I think is probably what would interest me.
I've got the islandness one to do because I ducked out of that one halfway through. Yeah.
But have you otherwise done all of them?
I withdrew from islandness, and there was another one I think happening, a third one in the spring term that Nick did, but I didn't. What is Nick? Are you still there? No, he's gone. I can't remember what it was, but I'm going to do islandness and then probably one of the creative writing courses because I want to learn less.
And when are you doing the dissertation?
Next year. I was just I was overloaded this year. I couldn't cope.
No.
I think I've done very well this afternoon. I haven't been to sleep yet. I was writing that bloody case study all night.
I know the feeling.
I finished at 2 a.m. doing it.
Oh, you're very good. I've just not been to sleep.
I had an awful week last week, and I couldn't get anything done. And I haven't written my essay for 9 o'clock tomorrow morning either for modern Orkney history. So.
Oh my God!
I think it's
how's
unlikely.
How's your arm? Sorry.
I don't know. I was down with the nurses earlier, seeing they were poking me around and seeing what's going on. No, I don't know. I can't. It's hard to know what is still a symptom of bruising, which I've got all over my back and shoulder, and what might have happened in the arm. But I've actually got fingers that are locking at the moment. I'll start typing, and then my hand will just seize up, and I don't know quite where to go from there.
Oh no!
It's terrible.
So I've been trying to do things one-handed and a bit of dictation, but of course the dictation doesn't come out right. So then you're doing lots of keyboard actions to edit it. So in some ways it's easier to, it's fine for an email. It doesn't matter if it's got a typo in, but trying to do my case study with tables and things like that was an absolute nightmare. But I got there in the end.
I tried some years ago with voice processing software, rather inspired by seeing it used in a spinal injuries unit. But it has all sorts of hazards, and when I wrote my charity report, the C's came out as the atrocities.
You certainly get some very odd things come out of it, but it's a lot better than it was, I must say. But
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, good luck.
Yes.
And you're finishing this year, aren't you? All done and dusted.
Probably, yes. Doesn't feel like it at the moment. Doesn't feel like I'll get done and dusted at the moment.
If you can postpone your other essay until after I've done my governance, I'll come over and be your secretary bird, and you can dictate it to me. Just get an extension, and we'll do it the following week.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, I've still got my governance one to write as well, of course, for next week. That's next week, isn't it? 5th. So we'll see what we can do.
Will you be around in September when the induction occurs? Because I'm planning to come again, just so that I meet people face to face, which I found very useful. So, are you likely to be on tap?
Yeah, I'm sure I will.
Oh, it might be nice to get in touch.
Yeah, that'd be nice. I'd enjoy that. Good. That would be good. That would be good.
Good.
I shall. I might sign up for a module next year. I might do medieval Orkney and Shetland history. So that would give me. That would also have the benefit of allowing me to keep my library card. So I might carry on doing. I might do something like that.
I've been advised by somebody in the college that you can sign up for free computer training, which maintains your library membership, and you can do one every year.
Okay.
What concerns me more than the libraries, I've used RefWorks, which they recommended. Yeah. But when we cease to be students, do we lose it, or can you export it to a free platform?
You can export it. Yeah. But I think if you want to carry on using RefWorks, you have to pay a fee, I think. But anyway.
I mean, all sorts of things you have access to, aren't there, as a student that you would lose. I don't mean cheaper coffee, but online library.
It's papers. It's reading papers. I mean, I've gone into an awful lot of stuff that I probably shouldn't read. Shouldn't have been accessing because I can. So yeah.
Okay. Well, good luck with your back and arm.
Yeah, it will come. I'm sure it will come good.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
See you around.
Nice to see you both. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.